The studio lights were too hot. Not a heat felt on the skin, but a pressure that seemed to cook the brain from the inside. For 19-year-old Lucas Levi, each bulb was a miniature sun, buzzing at a frequency only he seemed to hear. The sound vibrated behind his eyes, making it difficult to focus. The fabric of the shirt his mother, Mia Garcia, had insisted he wear chafed his neck. It felt like wearing sandpaper. He tried to concentrate on the soft texture of the velvet armchair, a sensory anchor amidst the chaos of voices, moving cameras, and the cloying scent of the host's perfume. Ivan Lambert, the host, wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a professional smile, polished, but empty. "So, Lucas," he said with a velvety condescension, "your mother told us you have this ability, a photographic memory. Is that what they call it?" Lucas simply nodded, his eyes fixed on a point just above Ivan's head, avoiding direct eye contact. The next question came like an arrow. "They say you know the date of any event. Let's test that." The audience chuckled as if they were about to witness a magic trick. Where are you watching this story from right now? Take a moment to think about it. No matter where you are, know that stories like this happen everywhere. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them, because what happened next changed everything. Ivan leaned forward. What was the main headline in the capital's newspaper on April 17, 1987? Lucas didn't hesitate. There were two main headlines depending on the newspaper. Diario de Mañana published, "Economic crisis leads to city center protests." Noticias do Dia focused on, "Historic trade agreement signed with foreign delegation." Silence filled the studio for a second before being broken by impressed applause. Even Lambert forced another smile. Incredible, a true human computer. And it was that word, computer, that made something snap inside Lucas. He wasn't a machine. He was a person. Ivan, sensing he was losing control of the inspirational narrative, decided to subtly humiliate him. "But what about the things that matter, Lucas? Human connections? Memory can't record those, can it?" That's when Lucas finally looked directly at him. And with a calmness that unnerved everyone, he said, "Memory records everything, Mr. Lambert, including what happened on October 14, 2008, at Northwood University." Ivan's smile froze. The world stopped. To understand that moment, we need to go back. We need to hear Mia Garcia's voice, Lucas's mother, not as she sounded on a TV show, but as she sounded on the nights she sat in the kitchen after everyone had gone to sleep, a cup of tea in her hands. She remembered Lucas as a quiet baby, a baby who rarely cried but who could spend hours fascinated by the patterns of light the window cast on the floor. When he started walking, he didn't run around the house. He walked in straight lines, organizing his toys by color and size, with a precision that was both wonderful and disconcerting. Other mothers at the park talked about their children's first kicks at a soccer ball, while Mia watched Lucas mentally cataloging the different species of fallen leaves on the ground. The word "different" started to emerge. In preschool, his teacher, Charlotte Wozniak, called her for a talk. "He's very intelligent, Mrs. Garcia. He already knows all his letters and numbers, but he doesn't play with the others. He just observes them." Mia felt a knot in her stomach. She knew. She saw how Lucas recoiled when other children were too loud, how he covered his ears and squeezed his eyes shut. She saw how he preferred the company of books, whose rules were clear and whose stories didn't change suddenly. The world of humans was unpredictable and frightening. The world of facts was safe. The autism diagnosis came at 6. For Mia, it wasn't a shock. It was a relief. Finally, there was a name. There was a map, however confusing and lacking a clear legend. For her husband, Arthur Moreira, it was like a blow. Arthur was a good man, a loving father, but he saw the world through a lens of traditional expectations. He dreamed of teaching Lucas to ride a bike, to play soccer, to have a boisterous group of friends. Instead, he had a son who found joy in memorizing the capitals of every country in the world and the reign dates of all European monarchs. The connection between them was difficult. Arthur would try to make small talk about sports, and Lucas would respond with the exact score and statistics of a game from 1972. Arthur saw this as distance, a refusal to connect. He didn't understand that this was Lucas's way of saying, "I love you." It was his way of sharing his world. Mia became a lioness. She read every book, attended every support group, talked to every specialist. She learned to decipher Lucas's signs of sensory overload before they became a crisis. She discovered that he calmed down with the weight of a heavy blanket on his legs and the repetitive sound of classical music. She learned to celebrate his victories, which weren't the same as other children's. The first time he looked into her eyes for more than 3 seconds. The day he spontaneously hugged her because she seemed sad. Each of these moments was a rare jewel, kept safe in her heart. Lucas's gift for memory was evident from an early age. At 8, he found an old almanac on a shelf, and within a week, memorized it cover to cover. He could recite the population of Mongolia in 1992, or the complete list of best cinematography Oscar winners. For Mia, it was a window into the beauty of his mind. For the outside world, it was an oddity. At school, it was a problem. Teachers didn't know what to do with him. He finished tests in 5 minutes and then spent the rest of the class rocking in his chair, immersed in his own world. Other children called him robot or walking Google. He didn't react with anger, only with a silent confusion. Why did people value small talk about the weather so much, and the fact that the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed on June 7, 1494, so little? The world didn't make sense. Mia spent sleepless nights worrying about his future. How would this kind, brilliant, and vulnerable boy survive in a world not designed for him? She just wanted others to see what she saw. Not a set of symptoms or a prodigious memory, but an incredible human being, with a heart as big as his mind. The path to acceptance was paved with false hopes and well-intentioned advice that felt more like sentences. As soon as the diagnosis was formalized, a sea of specialists emerged, each with a promise, a technique, a solution. "We need to make him more sociable," said a therapist named Miguel Campos, a man with a kind smile and a social skills manual that seemed to have been written for aliens. Lucas was enrolled in social skills groups. For him, it was like attending acting classes for a play he didn't understand and whose script changed with every scene. They taught him to make forced eye contact, to initiate small talk, and to interpret facial expressions through cards with drawings of faces. Lucas tried. Mia saw him struggle, an effort that left him completely exhausted at the end of each session. He would come home pale and silent, retreating to his room for hours to recover from the performance. He learned to smile when someone told a joke, even if he didn't understand it. He learned to say, "How was your weekend?" even if he didn't care about the answer. He was building a mask, a normal persona to present to the world, but the mask was heavy, and beneath it, the real Lucas felt increasingly invisible. Mia's pain was seeing him erase himself to fit into boxes that weren't his. She felt she was collaborating with the world's attempt to erase her son's essence. School was another battleground. Some teachers, like Mrs. Wozniak, tried to understand, but the rigid structure of the institution didn't allow for neurodiversity. Others saw Lucas's intelligence as a challenge or his lack of socialization as stubbornness. "He needs to try harder to fit in," said the principal, a man who believed that all problems could be solved with more discipline. His suggestion was that Lucas join a club. Mia and Arthur convinced him to try the history club, thinking it would be a safe environment where his passion would be valued. It was a disaster. At the first meeting, the teacher asked everyone to introduce themselves and say why they liked history. When it was Lucas's turn, he started talking about the complex silk trade routes of the 14th century, detailing taxes, caravanserais, and the politics of the Golden Horde. The other students, led by a popular boy named Enzo Davis, started to laugh. "Wow, man, relax. We just like war movies," Enzo said dismissively. Lucas stopped talking, confused. He was sharing what he loved. Why were they laughing? He never went back to the club. That day he spent hours locked in his room, arranging and rearranging his history books in chronological order, a ritual that calmed him. Mia heard the soft sound of the book spines touching, and her heart broke. The world was telling him, in every possible way, that the way he saw things was wrong. Social pressure came from all sides. Relatives at family dinners offered unsolicited advice. "He just needs a little push. In my day, there was nothing like this," we managed. "Why don't you enroll him in a soccer team? That would make him more of a man." Each comment was a small stab in Mia's chest, and an increasingly high wall between Arthur and his son. Arthur, desperate to see Lucas fit in, often echoed these sentiments. "Mia, maybe they're right. He spends all day with those books. It's not healthy. Their arguments became more frequent, always revolving around the same point. Mia wanted to protect Lucas and give him the tools to navigate the world as it was. Arthur wanted to change Lucas so that the world would accept him. Neither was wrong in their intentions, but the chasm between their approaches created constant tension at home. The false hope that Lucas could simply learn to be neurotypical was poisoning everyone, especially Lucas himself, who internalized every failure, every laugh, every piece of advice as proof that there was something fundamentally broken inside him. The real conflict, however, didn't take place in doctors' offices or classrooms, but within the four walls of their own home. It was a silent conflict, made of unspoken glances, closed doors, and a growing distance between father and son. Arthur Moreira loved Lucas with an intensity that frightened him, but his love was entangled with fear and unmet expectations. He looked at his son and saw a riddle he couldn't solve. When Lucas was little, Arthur tried to teach him to throw a ball. Lucas, instead of throwing, became fascinated with the seams of the ball, tracing the pattern. With his finger for almost an hour, Arthur felt a pang of frustration and sadness. This wasn't the son he had imagined. This disconnect deepened over time. Arthur worked long hours, and when he came home, he found Lucas immersed in his books or drawing complex historical maps. Arthur's attempts at conversation were clumsy. "Hey, champ, everything okay at school?" Lucas, without taking his eyes off the book, would respond with a monosyllabic yes. To Arthur, this was rejection. He didn't see that for Lucas the question was too broad and socially complex. If Arthur had asked, what was the main cause of the 30 Years' War, he would have received a 20-minute passionate and detailed answer, but neither of them knew how to build that bridge. Mia lived in the middle of this emotional crossfire. She was the translator, the mediator, the advocate. One afternoon, she returned from a particularly difficult parent-teacher meeting. Lucas's teacher complained that he had corrected a historical fact she had taught in front of the whole class. "It was disrespectful," she said. Mia tried to explain that Lucas hadn't intended to be disrespectful. He just had a need for correct information to prevail. The teacher didn't understand. Arriving home exhausted, Mia vented to Arthur. They don't understand him. They see him as a problem to be managed. Arthur's reaction was the last straw. "Mia, maybe he should learn to keep quiet. Life is like that. You can't just correct everyone. All the time." The argument exploded. "Learn to keep quiet?" Mia screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Do you want him to erase himself? To pretend to be someone he's not just so others feel comfortable? Is that what you want for your son?" Arthur retorted, his voice heavy with pain. "I want him to be happy. I want him to have friends. I don't want him to spend his whole life alone, locked in a room with old books." At that moment, Lucas was in the hallway, hearing everything. He didn't cry. He simply turned, went back to his room and softly closed the door. The click of the door was louder than any scream. There were no villains in that story, just people trying to do their best with the tools they had. Arthur wasn't a bad father. He was a father afraid. Afraid that his son would suffer, that he would be rejected. His way of protecting him was to try to mold him to the world's expectations. Mia, on the other hand, believed that the world needed to adapt, that Lucas's beauty lay precisely in his uniqueness. Society's gaze was a constant weight. At family gatherings, Lucas sat in a corner observing. Aunts and cousins ignored him or asked condescending questions. "Still obsessed with those history things, kid?" Mia saw the pitying glances directed at her, as if she were carrying a burden. But Lucas wasn't a burden. He was the light of her life. The human conflict was this: a mother's unconditional love against a father's fear, and the ignorance of a world that celebrates. Conformity and fears what is different, and at the center of it all, a brilliant boy increasingly felt like a problem to be solved. Change didn't come with a big dramatic event, but with a crumpled flyer Mia found on the bulletin board of the public library. It announced a history fair at the local university open to the public. The idea of taking Lucas to a crowded, noisy event seemed crazy, but something in the flyer attracted her. It was an academic event, focused on knowledge, not socialization. Maybe, just maybe, it would be different. Lucas, as expected, resisted. "There will be a lot of people, a lot of noise." Mia used the only argument she knew would work. The keynote speaker is a specialist in Byzantine history. He'll be talking about the Fourth Crusade. She saw a flicker of interest in Lucas's eyes. The Byzantine Empire was one of his areas of greatest fascination. They went. The university gymnasium was full, and Lucas immediately put on his noise-canceling headphones, a shield against the cacophony of the environment. He clung to Mia's arm, his shoulders tense. They walked past the booths set up by students, with castle models and presentations on historical figures. Lucas barely looked at them, focused only on surviving that sensory ordeal. That's when a woman with short gray hair and thick-rimmed glasses approached them. She was at a small, unassuming booth, with only a few old books and maps. "Hello," she said in a calm and direct voice, without the false animation most people used with Lucas. "I'm Dr. Sora Silic, from the Medieval History Department." Mia introduced herself and Lucas, who remained silent, looking at a 12th century map of Constantinople on the table. Dr. Silic didn't try to force a conversation with him. Instead, she looked at the map too. "It's a fascinating reproduction, isn't it? Most people don't realize the complexity of the aqueduct system that supplied the city." Lucas, to Mia's surprise, took off one of his headphones. "The aqueduct of Valens was the most important," he said, his voice a little hesitant. "Completed in 368 AD, it was over 90 kilometers long, but most of it was underground. People only know the bridges." Dr. Sora Silic smiled, a genuine smile of pure intellectual delight. "Exactly. And what was the crucial design flaw in the Theodosian walls that was exploited by the Crusaders in 1204? The question was specific, academic, a challenge." Lucas's eyes lit up. For the first time that day, he seemed relaxed. It wasn't a design flaw, but a strategic vulnerability. The Crusaders attacked through the Golden Horn, where the sea walls were lower and less guarded. The Byzantine navy was in decline and couldn't protect that flank. He spoke for 10 minutes straight, pouring out facts, dates, and tactical analyses with a passion Mia hadn't seen in a long time. Dr. Chelik listened, fascinated, without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't say, "Wow, you're so smart," or, "What an incredible memory." She said something far more powerful. "Your analysis is correct. Have you read Nicetas Choniates?" For the first time, someone wasn't seeing Lucas as an autistic person with a special interest. They were seeing him as a colleague, a historian. That moment was the silent turning point. Dr. Talik invited Lucas to visit the university library and even to audit some of her classes, without the pressure of grades or socialization. She didn't offer therapy or help. She offered access to knowledge. She offered respect. That day, as they left the fair, Lucas walked a little straighter. The world was still noisy and confusing, but he had found a small island of understanding, a place where his mind wasn't an oddity, but a treasure. The university library became Lucas's sanctuary. It was a place of silence and order, where the only sound was the soft turning of pages and the low hum of the lighting. He spent hours there, immersed in ancient texts and academic journals that Dr. Chilik recommended. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just accumulating facts. He was part of a community, however silent, of people who valued knowledge above all else. Dr. Chilik treated him like a junior research assistant. She gave him tasks, checking sources, cross-referencing, finding obscure details in digitized manuscripts. Lucas flourished. His mind, which was previously seen as a warehouse of random information, now had a purpose. Victories began to appear, small but immensely significant. One day, Arthur came home and found a printed article on the kitchen table. It was from an academic history journal. At the end, in the acknowledgement section, the author, a colleague of Dr. Silik's, thanked Lucas Levi for his invaluable assistance in locating rare primary sources. Arthur read the sentence 3 times. He looked at Lucas, who was sitting at the table, drawing a map of the Ottoman Empire. For the first time, instead of asking about school or friends, Arthur asked, "What are primary sources?" Lucas looked up from the map, surprised, and then he started to explain. He talked about letters, diaries, official records, the difference between a source and an interpretation. He spoke with his usual passion, but this time his father was listening, really listening. Arthur didn't understand everything, but he understood the most important thing. His son was brilliant. That night, for the first time in years, they really talked. For almost Half an hour. There was no big hug or dramatic declaration, just a father asking and a son answering. It was a small victory. Another victory came a few months later. Dr. Celik encouraged him to present a small part of his research at a symposium of graduate students. The idea of speaking in public was terrifying for Lucas, but the presentation wasn't about him. It was about the trading patterns of Venice in the 15th century. He could hide behind the facts. He went up to the podium, pale and trembling, avoiding the audience's gaze. But when he started talking about the data, his voice firmed. He didn't use jokes or rhetorical flourishes. He simply presented the information clearly, logically, and incredibly thoroughly. At the end, there was silence and then genuine applause. During the question and answer session, a student asked something complex about maritime insurance rates of the time. Lucas answered with an accuracy that impressed everyone. He wasn't trying to show off. He was just sharing what he knew. In the audience, Mia cried silently, not from sadness, but from a pride that barely fit in her chest. The greatest victory, however, was internal. Lucas began to see himself differently. He wasn't a broken boy who needed to be fixed. He was a researcher, a historian. His mind wasn't a defect, it was a tool. He still had difficulties. Social interactions were still exhausting. The world was still too noisy. But now he had a place where he belonged. He started communicating more with his parents, using his passions as a bridge. He created charts about the family's expenses, comparing them to historical economic trends. He explained current geopolitical tensions by tracing their origins in centuries-old treaties. He was using his language to connect. The mask he had worn for so long began to crack, not because he was being forced, but because he was, little by little, feeling safe enough to show who he really was. And the person beneath the mask was even more extraordinary than Mia and Arthur could have imagined. Lucas's transformation didn't go unnoticed. A story in the local newspaper about the unusual partnership between the young prodigy and the university professor caught the attention of the producers of Face to Face, a popular national talk show hosted by Evan Lambert. They saw the perfect recipe for an inspirational story. The young autistic person who overcomes their limitations with the help of a benevolent mentor. The narrative was simplistic, a cliché, but it was marketable. When the invitation arrived, the family hesitated. Mia had a bad feeling. She knew the show. Ivan Lambert was known for his incisive and sometimes sensationalist style. He built heroes and brought them down with equal ease. But it was Arthur who surprisingly defended the idea. This is a chance, Mia. A chance to show everyone what our son is capable of, to change the way people see autism. Dr. Celik agreed, with a caveat. As long as, Lucas wants to, and the focus is on his work, on his academic ability, not on his condition. Deep reflection took place in the family's living room. They talked with Lucas, not for him. They explained the pros and cons. For the first time, Lucas actively participated in a complex family decision. He thought for a long time. His motivation wasn't fame or recognition. It was accuracy. People have misinformation about autism, he said, with his impeccable logic. Maybe if I go there and give them the correct facts, they'll understand better. The decision was made. They would go. The preparation was intense. Mia coached Lucas on how to handle the studio lights and sounds. He would wear his discreet headphones until it was time to go on air. They rehearsed answers to likely questions. The focus would always be on returning to history, to research. They were naive, perhaps, in believing they could control the narrative. They saw this as an educational mission. For Ivan Lambert, it was just another segment, a piece of content to fill the time between commercials. In the dressing room, moments before going on stage, Lucas was surprisingly calm. He was mentally reviewing the lineage of the Ming Dynasty emperors. It was his self-regulation mechanism. Mia held his hand. Remember, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you get uncomfortable, we leave. He nodded. Arthur, standing near the door, put his hand on his son's shoulder. Just be yourself, son. That's more than enough. It was the first time Arthur had said something like that. The acceptance in his voice was real and unwavering. At that moment, the family was more united than ever. They were no longer fighting against Lucas's autism. They were fighting together for a world that would accept him for who he was. They entered the studio not as a family with a problem, but as a proud family. They didn't know they weren't going for an interview, but for a battle. And that Lucas's most powerful weapon wasn't his memory, but his unwavering need for truth. And then, they were there, under the hot lights, in front of millions of people. The beginning of the interview followed the predictable script. Ivan Lambert praised Lucas, calling him an inspiration. He asked Mia questions about the challenges of raising a child like him. Mia, with a fierce calm, gently corrected him. It's not a challenge, it's a journey. Lucas has taught me to see the world in a richer, more detailed way. The camera focused on Lucas, who was quiet, absorbing the environment, processing each stimulus. Ivan, feeling the story losing its sentimental appeal, decided to spice things up. That's when he started the memory test. The first question about the 1987 headline was a warm-up. Lucas answered precisely. The audience applauded. Ivan smiled, but there was a competitive glint in his eyes. He didn't like sharing the stage. He asked a few more questions, each more obscure than the last. Lucas answered them, all effortlessly. The audience's admiration was turning towards Lucas, and Ivan felt his position of power diminishing. That's when he made the fatal mistake. He tried to turn Lucas's ability into a weakness. Incredible. A true human computer. But what about the things that matter, Lucas? Human connections? Memory can't record those, can it? That veiled insult, the implication that he was less than human, was the catalyst. Years of being called a robot, of being misunderstood, of feeling the need to apologize for existing. All of that crystallized in that moment. Lucas looked at Ivan Lambert, and the world seemed to slow down. He didn't feel anger. He felt a cold and absolute clarity. The need to correct misinformation. The misinformation in this case was Ivan Lambert's impeccable public image. Memory records everything, Mr. Lambert, Lucas said, his voice clear and firm, cutting through the silence of the studio, including what happened on October 14, 2008 at Northwood University. Even Lambert's smile didn't freeze. It shattered. A fissure of panic appeared in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. But Lucas continued, not with malice, but with the precision of a historian presenting facts. On that day, sir, you gave a guest lecture to the journalism department. On the same day, a graduate student named Andrea Kang filed a formal complaint with the university's ethics committee, accusing you of plagiarism and appropriating her research for an article you published. The complaint was withdrawn 2 weeks later, when Ms. Kang left the program and the university, alleging unbearable pressure. A collective gasp went through the audience. The cameras instinctively closed in on Ivan's pale face. The producers panicked, yelled into their headsets, "Cut! Cut to commercial!" The screen went black, but it was too late. The truth had been spoken. Behind the scenes, chaos ensued. Ivan Lambert, trembling with rage, screamed at his team. Mia, Arthur, and Lucas were escorted out through a side exit in silence. In the car, nobody spoke for a long time. Then Arthur turned to his son in the back seat and said, his voice choked with emotion, "I'm so proud of you, Lucas." The pain didn't magically disappear. Lucas was still autistic. The world was still a challenging place, but something fundamental had changed. He had used his voice. He had defended himself and the truth on his own terms. The story exploded on the internet. Within hours, the hashtag Andrea Kang was trending. Inspired by Lucas's courage, Andrea Kang herself, now a librarian in another city, went public and confirmed the story, with evidence. Ivan Lambert's career imploded, but the real story wasn't about his fall. It was about Lucas's rise. He didn't become a celebrity. He returned to his quiet life, to the library, to his maps, and to Dr. Selig. But he walked with a new confidence. Hope wasn't in a world that suddenly became perfect, but in the tools he and his family had built. Communication, mutual respect, acceptance. The pain of exclusion still existed, but now there was the balm of understanding and unconditional love. Lucas Levi didn't need the world to understand him completely. He just needed the people he loved to see him. And finally they did. True strength isn't in conforming to the world, but in having the courage to be yourself, especially when the world insists you should be someone else. Lucas taught us that the truth spoken calmly is the most powerful weapon of all. If this story touched you, like, comment, and subscribe. Someone might need to hear this today.